I'm sure Salem's cold. Eugene's fairly chill. I don't think it's broken freezing yet, but I was trying to imposter. This is about as close as I got without some of my scarier Halloween materials to imposter with. But I failed
Okay,
miserably. You can still tell it was me.
indeed. Okay, so we'll call the meeting to order. This is the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board meeting on January 21st, 2025. So welcome to the new year. We're going to start out by running through the roster and doing a quorum check. So I'll start at the top. Aaron Ashley, say aye if you're here. Laura Feldman,
Here.
Jim Doherty,
Yeah, good morning, everyone.
good morning. Mia Burke,
Hello, good morning.
Tim Seymour,
Here.
Stephen Bedrick,
Here.
Tom Roberts, Mike Freeman, Maddie Stitzel.
Here.
And I'm going to run quickly through the legislators. They are not here today because this is the first day of the Oregon legislative session. That would be Representative Gamba, Representative Levy, and who am I forgetting?
Senator Gorsuch.
Senator Gorsuch, right. And so the way this works is that every 2 years, the legislature will reassign representatives and senators to different boards. So we would likely get a replacement for Senator Hansel, who left the board when he didn't run for re-election. So, Mark, do we have a quorum?
Yes, I believe you do.
Okay, so continue on with introductions. Oregon Department of Energy folks online, could you introduce yourselves, please?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff, and good morning, everybody. Max Woods, Oregon Department of Energy, Assistant Director for Nuclear Safety and Emergency Preparedness. Thanks for joining today. I'll push it over to Matt Hendrickson. I see your camera's up.
Yep, my camera is on. I'm Matt Hendrickson, not so sneaky with my headgear, apparently. A radioactive waste remediation specialist, and yeah.
Mark.
Good morning, everyone. Mark Reese, staff, Oregon Department of Energy, Board Administrator.
Thanks, Mark. We have Sarah. I see Sarah here.
Good morning. I'm Sarah Lovetang, and I'm the Hanford ecologist working on the natural resource damage assessment.
And Tom.
Hi, Tom Cecilia. I'm the Hanford hydrogeologist and fuel specialist for the team.
And thank you. Gary, could you introduce yourself and your role on the board, please?
Good morning, Gary Younger, Department of Energy. I am the federal liaison between the Hanford Field Office and the Oregon Department of Energy.
Okay, thank you. And the speakers that we have later today will be introducing themselves. So wanted to remind everyone that this meeting is being recorded and transcribed. And we will start with a very quick agenda review and then get into it. So this is roll call, opening remarks, introductions. We will approve the last meeting, October 2024 meeting summary. That's part of what we call a consent calendar. Laura Feldman will present a land acknowledgement if she's up to that today. Then we'll move into US DOE presentations, a break at 10:15, 10:30. David Reblog from the Tri-Cities Development Council, TRIDEC, will make a presentation, followed by more by Oregon Department of Energy update led by Max Wood. Then board business at 11:30. We have public comment at 12 noon, followed by a short lunch break. We'll pick it up after lunch with the Washington Department of Ecology updates, and we plan to adjourn the meeting at 1:30 p.m. this afternoon. So the next item on the agenda is the approval of the October 2024 meeting summary. This is what's called the consent calendar. So are there any changes? If not, the meeting summary will be approved. So are there any suggested changes to that summary? Okay, seeing none, it is approved. Laura, would you mind doing a land acknowledgement, please?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Let's see. We are settled on sacred and stolen lands, the traditional village sites of the Wanapum, Confederated Tribes of the Yakima Nation, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indians, Confederated Tribes of Warm Springs, and all of the other tribes and bands of the Columbia and Willamette Rivers. As we enter the ever more precarious and challenging time of the climate crisis, with social injustices that prevent us from adapting to cataclysmic changes coming our way, may we develop a heart that is ready for anything. And what follows is taken from a Dharma talk given yesterday by Elizabeth Christine of the Earth Treasure Vase Global Healing Project. Today, we unite to lean into the courageous heart capable of holding everything, a heart capable of transforming all that is perceived as a time of defeat and setback into nourishment and purpose, strengthening our dreams of equality, care, and justice. Though none of us here were taken from our families to be educated in government boarding schools, we were educated out of our Indigenous connection with the earth. But along with Indigenous communities around the world, we're in a process of recovering our language of connection. Understanding this, may we unite across imposed racial boundaries in a dynamic process of recovery, continuing to remediate, restore, and protect sites such as Hanford as part of the living earth. May we enter this time of uncertainty and not knowing with trust in the land and in one another, admitting we really don't know what the future holds, but creating space for all life here and now as we call on one another during these challenging times. May it be so.
Thank you, Laura. Gary Younger, would you mind introducing our next speaker for, I believe, the tank waste operations update?
Sure. Good morning. We've got Ricky Bang, who is the Deputy Assistant Manager for our tank waste operations. And he'll be talking a little bit about what's going on there with tank waste. Then following him, we'll be talking about the waste treatment plant update. There's a lot going on there. So we've got Bill Clarno and I think Tom Tainer, if he's joined us. Yes, Tom has joined us. So they'll be talking about what's going on there. And then to follow it up, given time at the end, we're going to have some discussions of milestones and records of decision for 100K, 100N, and the 324 building. Jason Capron is on board to talk us through that. So without any further ado, let me go on and share my screen for the tank waste update. You'll let me know if you can see it.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So Ricky, all yours.
Great, thanks, Gary. Gary, could you also just give me a quick audio check?
I hear you.
Perfect, thank you. Good morning, everyone. Again, my name is Ricky Bang, as Gary mentioned, and I am the Deputy Assistant Manager for Tank Waste Operations. This morning, I'd just like to give you a short background of the activities that we have here at the Hanford Tank Farms and the 222S Laboratory. It includes tank waste treatment, retrievals, and some of the activities and facilities needed to support the direct feed low activity waste program here at the Hanford site. Go on to the next slide. We'll talk through some of the progress that we've made here on the tank waste treatment mission over the last couple months, over last year, in preparation for a lot of the upcoming activities this calendar year. Next slide. What I'd like to do is start off with the tank side cesium removal system. This is a treatment system here at the Hanford site that's used for pre-treating tank waste as feed for direct feed low activity waste operations. So at Hanford, we completed the latest campaign at the tank side cesium removal system on November 30th. So as a result, we have over 830,000 gallons of pre-treated waste feed that is currently stored and ready for transfer and feed over to the waste treatment and immobilization plant for direct feed low activity waste operations. You can kind of see in the bottom two photos, the ion exchange columns that remove radionuclides such as cesium from the tank waste. There are 19 ion exchange columns currently stored on a storage pad. And so each of those columns really represents radionuclides and cesium that's been removed from that tank waste. There's over 500,000 curies currently sitting removed from tank waste and stored in the resin inside the ion exchange columns and stored on the storage pad right now. In the upper right photo, you can kind of see inside the tank side cesium removal system. Again, the tank waste is fed into the tank side cesium removal system. It's routed through the ion exchange columns. That removes the cesium from the tank waste as part of the treatment process for feed to the WTP. Coming up, we are planning the next processing campaign in coordination with WTP operations so that we are able to start the next processing batch just ahead of hot commissioning.
Ricky, would you prefer us to hold questions to the end or interrupt you in the middle?
I'm okay with interruptions if that's the preferred method. I think for tank waste operations, I kind of go in chunks with kind of our operational activity. So if there is something specific to this activity, I'm happy to take questions as we go.
I just have one quick question. What percent of the radionuclides are removed in the TSCR process?
We know it's well over 99%.
Thank you.
All right. If no other questions, we'll go on to the next slide. Kind of continuing with just the tank waste treatment, but on this one being a demonstration activity, we have the test bed initiative demonstration. This was a initiative that we kicked off.
Excuse me.
Yes.
My microphone didn't work. The question that you were asked was how much of the radioactivity was removed. Can you elucidate that? It's all of the radioactivity in the supernatant is in the form of cesium?
I think the majority of it is in the form of cesium. There are other radionuclides that we may remove, like strontium, as part of this process. And so what we do to calculate how much of the radioactivity is removed, we take a sample from the tank, the feed tank going into TSCR. So we know we start with the radioactivity in tank AP107. We take a sample, and so we know the radioactivity inside the feed tank. We then also pull a sample from the end storage tank, AP106. And so based on that sample, we know the difference between, what was going into TSCR and what came out. And we know that over 99% of the radioactivity was removed from the feed tank to the storage tank.
Yes, whatever form it's in. Thank you.
Sir. Continuing on with the testbed initiative, again, the initiative was intended to treat about 2,000 gallons of tank waste out of a west area tank at Hanford, specifically tank SY101, and take that pre-treated tank waste and ship it to a commercially licensed facility outside the state of Washington, in Texas or Utah, for grout and disposal. So with the testbed initiative, the equipment installation, if you look at the upper left photo, started in July of 2024, continued through August. And so we have the yellow storage containers in the upper left being placed in SY Tank Farm. And then in the upper right are the kind of the operational tents for the testbed initiative equipment. And the large tent on the left of the upper right photo is where the yellow storage containers are housed. Delay totes for ensuring that the radionuclides, pretreatment activity occurred, is in a smaller tent in the center of the upper right photo. And then you can kind of see a line and a white top of a pump that is directly above tank SY101 and where the ion exchange column is housed. So that equipment was all installed again in the July-August timeframe. Testing of the equipment occurred in September, and that was completed. Then operations of the equipment, the testbed initiative equipment, started and was completed in October of 2024. Treatment and operations took 9 days. So the crews did a wonderful job preparing and executing really a kind of a new task in SY Tank Farm, but they executed it wonderfully in 9 days. 1,961 gallons was treated and stored inside of 6 containers in SY Farm. Those containers are in the upper left, those yellow containers. They are DOT type A containers, so they are made of steel, double-walled containers, meaning they're steel containers inside of a steel container. Samples were also taken at the end of operations from each of the 6 containers. And those samples you can see on the lower left, being handled by the workers out in SY Farm. Field readings, initial field readings were pretty low, so likely the radiological content is also likely low. And by low, I'm saying think on the order of dental x-rays, not even the dental x-rays that you would normally take, but really the bite x-rays that you would take at the dentist's office. So that's kind of the radiation levels that we're kind of talking about for the samples and for the pre-treated tank waste out of the testbed initiative.
Ricky, you have a question.
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, hi, good morning, Rick. This is Esteban Ortiz. My question, and looking at the pictures, this is July, August, and I would say even September. If you could kind of speak, and especially noticing the workers and the temperatures, what was the whole procedure during safety training and safety workers? What was the feedback, or was there any incidents where the workers, like especially body heat and trying to monitor all that, with the safety of the workers?
Oh, good question. The workers were trained from our single shell tank retrievals crew. They did a great job of training, working through the procedures, 90s of operations and not a single issue. So I thought they did outstanding. The workers did well. I think if anything, we could have prepared them better to understand what they would be handling as far as like the samples, because I think the ion exchange columns was much more effective than we thought. Um, they were actually preparing for higher levels of radiation than we actually received. A good thing that everyone planned for more conservative levels of radiation, and the equipment performed better than planned, and the radiation was lower than expected. I think we actually paused for a day because the workers thought the radiation monitoring equipment was broken because it was reading 0 the first day. So they had to pause, verify the equipment was working. It was working. It was just telling that the ion exchange column was working better than expected. But overall, I think the worker feedback was very positive. And then just from a observer perspective, 9 days of operations with no issues, pausing when they were uncertain. I think that crew did a great job. Did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
So again, samples were pulled in the lower left, and then sample analysis did go to the 222S laboratory here at the Hanford site. The sample analysis typically takes about 120 days. So from the end of October, that would put us at about the end of February to get those sample results. And really the organics analysis is a long pole in the tent with that whole process. And so once the sample analysis is complete and all the preparations are complete, those 6 containers would be transported to those commercially licensed facilities in Texas and Utah for grout and disposal. Any other questions on the testbed initiative? I see one question.
Yes, hi. So how much radiation, what was the radiation level you ended up with? Because it's my understanding that there is no safe level of radiation either in the environment or the dentist's office. But I know that I'm not here to debate that. I'm just wondering what you ended up with.
Yeah, I think, yeah, I would say based on the field readings from the sample bottles, so if you look at the lower left and, well, the 2 left photos, we have the yellow container and the sample bottles. The range was about 0 to 0.1 millirem, right, from the outside of that glass vial or the steel container. And again, I would say that's unofficial because what will be official will be the sample results themselves. Now, a 0 to 0.1 millirem reading might be, again, what you get at the dentist office every year. I think an airplane flight from like California to New York is on the order of 0.5 millirem. So that, again, what's safe is arguable probably, but that's where the scale is for the tank weight, the pre-treated waste out of the testbed initiative. Did that
Thank
answer your
you.
question? Okay.
Yes, thank you.
And next question. Sorry, I can't see names.
Hi, yeah, Ricky, this is Mia. I'm curious if you're going to be using this Tisker on a stick method of removing the waste and passing it through, since it's really specific to the testbed initiative. Do you think you'll be using this again in the future? How did that go in terms of testing out that equipment?
Let's see. So, the testbed initiative equipment, the column itself is like a one-time use, like our tank size cesium removal system. So the column itself will have to remove and then store at the Hanford site. I think given that the equipment will be was successful in its operations, now we kind of have another technology that we can evaluate for potential future use. Yeah, I think that's about as far as we have. I think we're focused now on getting that tank waste transported and disposed of, and then we'll be able to fully evaluate how successful the testbed initiative was. Any other questions? All right, one more, looks like Michael Freeman.
Yes, just to follow up on Mia's question. You say you processed 800,000 gallons through 19 columns. And in this application, you put 2,000 gallons through effectively the same column.
It is a different column that was used in a testbed initiative. So Gary, if you scroll up one slide, so the tank side cesium removal system used these large multi-ton ion exchange columns that require that red forklift to move into a process module on the upper right column. And it required kind of a 3-column process for the tank side cesium removal. So again, about 800,000 gallons processed through those 19 columns or so. But the testbed initiative, if we go back to slide 5, again, that had, we look at the upper right, there's a pump that fits into a riser that then gets installed into the tank. That riser might be about only 1 to 2 feet wide. So it's a much smaller column, almost a one and done type application for this. So we'll have to evaluate, once we get the sample results, we may be able to tell what was removed with the column there. And then also see what kind of state the equipment was in once we are able to remove the equipment.
So,
Michael, I think I do owe you then some information about kind of resin performance and the volume it took to remove the radionuclides that we're talking about.
The primary concern with a zeolite absorption column, I believe, is particle plugging. And so is there a micron filter ahead of this?
Yes, on both the tank size cesium removal and the testbed initiative, there was a filter, and specifically on testbed initiative, tank SY101 was allowed to settle to avoid any solids.
Thank you.
Great. All right, going on to the next slide. In addition to tank waste treatment, another big part of our tank waste operations is single shell tank retrievals. And so that activity is where we remove tank waste from single shell tanks into double shell tanks. And those are tanks within a tank through our retrieval activities. Most recently, tank AX101 here on the screen was the 4th and final of the 4 tanks in AX farm to be retrieved. And I always like showing the before and after photo. So you kind of see on the left the before photo of our single shell tank, AX101, and the after photo. So just really like seeing the waste being removed from our single shell tanks and what it looks like afterwards. AX101, again, was the final tank in AX farm. It had over 400,000 gallons of tank waste in it. You can see a lot of the salt cake that was in that tank. It had more tank waste in it than the other 3 tanks in the farm combined. But that tank waste out of AX101 was retrieved and transported to a double shell tank. Field operations completed July, fall timeframe, so you can kind of see the visual inspection that was completed in October of 2024. This would be the 21st tank that was retrieved, and this would be the second farm at Hanford that has been retrieved. So good accomplishment by the retrieval crew out at Hanford in completing this tank and tank farm. I feel like completing a tank farm is a significant accomplishment here. And if I'll kind of continue with other single shell tank retrievals and can take questions at the end. Next slide I have is after AX farm, right? So AX farm was the second tank farm that we've retrieved, and that farm's kind of shown in the center of this photo of the 200 East area. C farm being the first farm that was retrieved over on the right of this photo. We've been preparing A farm for a few years now for the next farm to be retrieved, the third farm to be retrieved. The first tank to be retrieved out of A farm is tank A101. And retrievals did start last fall. It had about 350,000 gallons in it of tank waste. It's currently about halfway retrieved. So 56% retrieved. That's on track to be completed this fall. On the next slide, I'll show tank A102. So tank by tank, there are also preparations that are needed to prepare each tank for retrievals. Tank A102 is the second tank in A farm to be retrieved. Equipment installation started last fall. Installation, I would say, finished in December, January timeframe. Testing of the equipment is ongoing right now. That should wrap up within the next month, and then operations of A102 retrievals would also start within the next month or so. And then both A101 and A102 would kind of finish up fall of 25 or this coming fall. It's also the kind of the first application of parallel single shell tank retrievals that we'll have here in tank farms, meaning that we'll work on retrieving 2 tanks at the same time. So that's something that the work crew will be trying out for the first time this year. That's why you kind of have 2 tanks kind of being retrieved in parallel and finishing up around the same time frame. Any questions on single shell tank retrievals? Okay, that looks like one from Matt Hendrickson.
Hello again, Ricky. Yeah, last week talked a little bit about the on Exchange Media. So you're doing these retrievals in parallel. Where is that retrieved waste going to?
So it is going to our double shell tanks, and for each tank that's being retrieved, there is a designated double shell tank. And I think for AX farm, that was our AZ double shell tanks. And for A farm, is it the same tank farm? Let me look that up real quick and I'll get back to you in a quick minute. And so maybe the other thing I'll explain as I kind of look this up is with the retrieval activities. I always see retrieval activities as the first set of operations as part of the tank waste treatment mission. And so we are retrieving tank waste from single shell tanks to our double shell tanks. And then from double shell tanks, we'll make transfers from double shell tanks to double shell tanks. So imagine, let's see, what would be a good photo? Gary, if we can go back one slide. Thank you, sir. So AP farm is kind of towards the bottom of the slide deck. And so towards the bottom of the slide deck, that's where the tank side cesium removal system would be located. And then that would feed the WTP plant. But the AP farm has tanks within it, and we'll move tank waste from an AP tank into AP 107. And that would provide feed to Tisker. And then within AP farm, we'd refill the tank that would then feed AP 107. Similarly, as part of the tank waste flow sheet, we'd feed forward from our double shell tanks into AP farm. And so in the future, tank farms like AN, AY, AW would feed into the AP farm. A farm retrievals is feeding, looks like A102 is feeding into A101. A101 also went into AP101. So Matt, hopefully I answered your question.
Thank you, Rick. Yeah, I do appreciate it. I know that sometimes you can be a little constrained on your DST space, so I was curious about where it was going.
Yes, sir. All right, Esteban?
Yes, thank you, Ricky. You mentioned you were doing something for the first time. This wouldn't be an impact on budgets, timetables, or what's the reason that this is getting tried for the first time? I forgot, what is it that you mentioned?
Yeah, so in the past, we'd retrieve one single shell tank at a time. Right now, we're doing two single shell tanks at the same time. So A101 and A102 will have waste retrieved from it and transferred into AP101, kind of in parallel, kind of two tank retrievals into one tank at the same time. And I think what this does is actually provides us with an opportunity to find more schedule efficiencies and cost efficiencies in doing single shell tank retrievals.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? All right, I'll go on to the next slide and really wrap up with one more slide, Gary. There we go. Wrap up with kind of the final preparations that we have here at Tank Farms for direct feed low activity waste operations. There are two facilities that I'll focus on for this update. The first one being the effluent treatment facility. This facility treats the secondary liquid waste that we receive from the waste treatment plant, the 242A evaporator, and other Hanford facilities. And this facility has been undergoing upgrades of its systems and installation of new systems, really to support the pace needed of operations for DFLAW and the Hanford site, really right now and for the foreseeable future. And so we expect to receive more secondary liquid waste than we have in the past. And we've been upgrading the effluent treatment facility to handle the increase in that volume. So the last set of upgrades was completed this past fall. Right now, we're going through testing of the final set of upgraded systems. In the photo, you kind of see the exterior, of where some of the upgrades and new facilities have occurred. The white text really points out where some of those new facilities are. So you can see the chillers that have been upgraded, the new load-in station that was expanded, the backup load-in station to the lower left, new storage tanks, and the acetonitrile treatment system just outside of the main facility. Looks like I see a question from Jeff.
Yes, is this facility sized for the high-level waste treatment effluent as well?
I don't think so. I think we do have margin available for the dark feed low activity waste facility. With any high level waste program, as always, we'll have to evaluate the the capacity of the facility. Okay, we'll go on to the next slide. And so what I also want to show is just a couple of photos of the facility, of the systems inside or next to the facilities as well. The upper row of photos kind of show the acetonitrile treatment and storage systems that we've installed at the effluent treatment facility. The two systems on the lower row shows our upgraded filtration system and our carbon dioxide removal system. So again, those facilities are installed. We're doing final tests of those systems right now. And then we'll turn those over to operations to support WTP operations. I will add that currently, in parallel with the testing, we did start a new processing campaign at the effluent treatment facility, and that is to reduce the volume that's in the liquid effluent retention facility, basin number 43. So that will reduce the volume there for continued operations at the 242A evaporator. I think the target for that campaign is about 3 to 5 million gallons. So good to have ETF up and running and processing millions of gallons each and every year. Okay, if no questions on effluent treatment facility, I'll go on to the next slide. I just want to touch briefly on the 222S laboratory. This is an operating radiological laboratory at the Hanford site, has been operating, I think, for decades now. This past year, I think, it's processed about 1,000 samples for the Hanford site, many of which were from the tank farms, but it does also process samples for our risk reduction activities as well. This past year, it did undergo some minor upgrades, but good upgrades for the laboratory analysts at the site. So last year, just want to point out that they did replace the hot cell windows just past fall. And so it replaced the old oil-filled hot cell windows with new gas-filled hot cell windows, provides better visibility for those operators, and you can kind of see them in the center. But it also provides a 25-year design life for these windows in support of really continued operations for Hanford site operations. There's some room renovations and some analytical equipment upgrades that also occur at the laboratory just to kind of continue the rhythm of maintenance that's needed at the laboratory to continue with their processing of radiological samples for the Hanford site each and every year. And that concludes my my presentation, my updates on tank waste operations. I think from a retrieval, treatment, and DFLAW support update, we've made good progress here in support of all activities. So I appreciate the opportunity to provide an update this morning. Any final questions? See one from I'll start with Esteban and then go on to Matt.
Yeah, thanks, Ricky. The big thing and the trend, I think, in all the presentations you did was that the constant, and I think with your final presentation about the laboratory, about learning about, the radioactivity and, what's new. So what's the biggest thing, I think, in the ongoing process of this treatment process that you're finding, especially, I'm glad Tom, always educates us about the radioactivity and all the stuff that I'm not good at, but what would you say that, especially within this, especially the treatment, the test bed initiative, what would you, in trying to, cost and everything and worker safety, what is it that right now you're all kind of popping out and it's looking at, for your work schedule?
No, I think that's a good question. I think between everything that we do, from the tank waste treatment, from tank size cesium removal, test bed, um, the retrievals and the laboratory, getting that worker feedback in, improving the technology that we have to give the workers the tools that they need to efficiently treat tank waste, reduce the risk at the Hanford site, and doing so safely. Worker feedback has been key to all of that. But with tank waste treatment, I think we have a couple of technologies with ion exchange that's scalable, right? And I think that's important, as that we can find efficient tank waste treatment technologies that's scalable. Current activities with tank size cesium removal is to work on the next evolution of it with the advanced modular pretreatment system. That design and facility would provide a lot of the upgrades or changes needed to improve kind of the worker usability of that system, just equipment, valves, joints, cameras, access, space that the workers need to do their job safely while delivering the throughput of tank waste treatment needed for getting that tank waste out of the tanks and then feeding it over to the WTP. Retrievals, the workers are giving us a lot of ideas for new technologies that we would do to reduce the radioactive risk to those workers, because they're really the most hands-on with the tank waste, right? They're the most directly engaged up front, the closest to the tank waste when it comes to pit work, with removing equipment that's then needed to install the equipment. So reducing the radiation exposure to the workers is key as we went into AFARM. So there has been new technology that we deployed with retrievals to help them with that. With the laboratory, I would say it's mostly ergonomics. They have a lot of repetitive work. And so with the workforce, it's going to be about ergonomics, reducing repetitive motion. They probably deal with actually the most hazardous chemicals. They deal with hazardous laboratory chemicals on a day-to-day basis. So for them, it's handling the industrial hygiene hazards and reducing the ergonomic hazards that really helps the laboratory out. Did that kind of help answer your question, Esteban? I know kind of covered a broad range there.
No, thank you, Rick. Appreciate it.
Okay, I think I said Matt next.
Hello again, Ricky. Now, this wasn't part of your presentation, but as a curiosity of mine, and that's the WARM project, West Area Risk Mitigation. What kind of preparations have you and your team made for the WARM area and maybe SY-103 retrieval, things of that nature?
All right, so West Area. So we are in the process of preparing SY Farm and the West Area Single Shelf Tank Farm. So primarily just site prep, survey work, and such to figure out the infrastructure that would be needed for West Area retrievals and West Area treatment. With the West Area project itself, we are working on the design of the pipelines, the pumps, the pit work needed for one, pre-treatment of tank waste out of SY-101, reconfiguring SY Farm in a fashion similar to AP Farm, right? So having a feed tank, having a tank waste, pre-treated tanks waste storage tank, and then figuring out how to transport that treated tank waste. And then preparing all the regulatory documentation to go along with the design. So really right now we're just in the design phase, hoping to get through the design phase. Gosh, conceptual design phase, I think, is this year. Final design could still take another year on that. And then the regulatory documentation, such as the NEPA, we would still have to draft and provide for public comment. Matt, did that answer your question?
Very much so. And again, thank you, Ricky. I appreciate you being here.
Okay. Up next, I got Max.
Thanks, Ricky. Appreciate all the information here. Could you, so this question is sort of related to what you were just talking about. How does the testbed initiative fit into that, your preparations for the West area remediation, or call it the WARM project? Could you speak to how the data collected from TBI will be utilized to inform that future project, offsite disposal of waste?
Yeah, I think the testbed initiative, I would say, is more than just the operations, the 9 days of operations that occurred. If we look at the full evolution of the testbed initiative, we went through the evolutions of the waste incidental to reprocessing, those evaluations. We did the homework for the NEPA environmental assessment. And so a lot of the data that we took for just the 2,000 gallons from the regulatory documentation, we'll take that work, expand it, and include it in the West area waste incidental to reprocessing, as well as the NEPA documentation and analysis for West area. We have an understanding of the capabilities of the facilities, the commercially licensed facilities in Utah and Texas. We understand, we've gathered a lot of data on transportation as well through the testbed initiative. And so we have to consider all of that into the West area regulatory documentation and analysis that we are drafting and will provide for public comment. The operations itself, I think we have a good sense of the material in SY 101 from the testbed initiative, and then from WARM and West area, we'll have an understanding of what's in SY 102 and SY 103. And then we'll be able to take the data that we collect from SY 103, SY 102, and SY 101 to feed into the design of the WARM project. The testbed initiative, we'll know how effective ion exchange is and would be able to use that to inform the design of the West area project and what ion exchange would look like, or filtration might look like, or what the technology would need to be for the West area tanks. Does that help, Max?
Yep. Thanks, Ricky.
All right. Last question. Sorry, just an email. I don't know the name. Feldman?
Yes, thank you, Laura. Yeah, Ricky, you alluded to preparing to adapt to the small nuclear presence that's increasing there. And I wonder how much waste from those kinds of small modular nuclear reactors do you anticipate having to deal with? And you are planning for this, is that correct?
I don't know what's occurring with small modular nuclear reactors. We are working on designing a West area risk management project. That will be tank waste treatment located in SY Farm.
Okay, well, thanks.
Any other questions?
So time check here, Gary Younger, are we in good shape?
Yeah, I'm seeing we're currently at 9:24, and I think we are good to go to proceed.
Okay.
Hey, thanks, Ricky. I'll go and pull up our waste treatment plant presentation with Tom Tainer and Bill Clarno. You two gentlemen are ready.
Yeah, we are. Tom, you want to start off? Introduce yourself.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, my name is Tom Tyner. I'm the High Level Waste Program Manager. I work for Matt Irwin. Back to you,
Hello,
Bill.
I'm Bill Clarno. I work on the WTP project, do a number of things. Is a manager, and I work for Tom as well. Next slide. All right, so what's being briefed today? We're going to brief the DFLAW status, and I'll take that, and then Tom will brief the DFHLW status. So that's kind of our overview for today. Next slide, please. All right, so here's an update for the commissioning status. So we've made a lot of progress over the last year. The picture on the top left is the control room. So we're operating, we really do have an operating plant. We have control room operators on site 24/7. We have both melters full, and we continue to do commissioning tests on the plant. The lower picture on the left, you could see some filled containers. So we filled 20 containers to date of frit, and that's just our process to test out the system and make sure it's working right. On the upper right was the picture in December of us completing all of our prep for receiving ammonia. And then on the bottom in December, you could see the 2 ammonia trucks. The first step in the delivery of ammonia is to do leak testing. So the vendor actually has a team that specializes in going out and performing leak tests. And so that was that picture. That's what that picture showing, is them performing leak tests. All right, next slide. All right, Tom.
Okay, thank you. These photos that you see here are progress for our low risk or rework construction. But before I go into discussing the photos, I'd just like to make sure that if there's new people on the call, the High Level Waste Project was restarted in 2023. 2024, the emphasis has always been on to change our philosophy from design build to design then build. So the first phase of going through right now from 23 through 27 is complete the 90% design of 59 systems and balance of facilities or ancillary support facilities. Included in that will be applying lessons learned from DFLAW in a number of commercial facilities, both in the United States, in England, Sellafield, as well as in France, Le Havre. So lessons learned are being applied. Risk reduction activities, we're doing a lot of upfront system testing, component testing to try to influence design on the front end. So with that being said, we're also doing some low risk of rework construction. You see, actually, the photo on the left is for a concrete pumper truck. I didn't catch it in time, the error. But we have been completing in 24, we did 15 concrete placements, which included 2 walls and 13 concrete pads on the 58-foot level. We also went forward with doing de-risking. As I mentioned, we had a number of non-conformance reports and condition reports of goals of 50% reduction of listed ones in 24. We actually exceeded those. We did 72% of the non-conformance reports and 67% completion, or excuse me, 64% completion of the other reports. We also completed 100% of the aging and obsolescence reports, which was equipment that was in our warehouses. We anticipated roughly about a 40% failure rate. We only saw 18%. Now that was just the first phase of aging and obsolescence reviews going forward. Right now we are looking at components, et cetera, to see if the supply chain could support our to refurbish or to provide new ones. So going forward.
Tom,
Yes.
sorry, could I interrupt for a moment? This board has not been briefed on high-level waste plans for several years, probably 4 or 5 years. So if you wouldn't mind kind of backing up and going from 10,000 to 50,000 feet and maybe give us just a thumbnail sketch of the history, where we are now, and kind of a global view just to educate the board on high-level waste plans at Hanford.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Appreciate that. I probably should have asked more clearly up front going forward. The high-level waste project was paused back in the 2016 timeframe. Since then, for technical issues, and of that, they have been closed, is my understanding, and then also a number of quality assurance issues going forward with regards to not only the high-level waste facility, but also the pre-treatment facility. The decision's been made that we are going to go forward, and it's in accordance with the holistic negotiations and the consent decree results of the new milestones that are now being implemented with the state. And the high-level waste program has been sequenced to make sure that we meet those new dates, such as to complete the design by 2027, and then develop a high confidence baseline to put in place and propose new milestones to meet the dates in the holistic decree. So that's 2028 timeframe. Initially, with regards to, we are moving from a high-level waste with a pre-treatment facility. We're going to a new approach, which is in accordance with the consent decree with the state of Washington, to a direct feed high-level waste, similar to what we're seeing with the low-activity waste effort. What that means is the pre-treatment facility is still there, still being maintained for surveillance and maintenance activities. No official decision has been made on what to do with that facility. We have started back in late summer of past year to look at options for the pre-treatment facility. And then Ricky had indicated also we are heavily integrated with tank waste operations, Ricky's group, to make sure that we stay in alignment so that the waste that we receive from the tanks is something we can process through the high-level waste facilities. And then also with the direct feed option, we're working with them to make sure that the waste acceptance criteria and the point of compliance is mutually agreed to between our two groups, but also between the new contractor, H2C, as well as BNI, who's completing the design. During that time frame, the initial effort from 2020 or 2002 to today to 2023 was a design build mentality. We're designing and building at the same time. That has changed. There's a number of errors that were introduced into the system to try and meet schedule. And I'm not throwing stones at anybody. It's good people trying to make the project work. We've gone to design then build. So that's why we have the heavy emphasis up front and restarting the high-level waste facility to go forward, get the designs complete, 59 systems and an additional 3 facilities we call BOFs, or balance of facilities, going forward. And those reviews have started. Quick point, the 90% designs of 2024, we completed 6 of those. We completed 160% design, and we also completed several 30% design reviews, which is more like your conceptual design reviews to your near final design reviews. Now, am I hitting the mark, Jeff, or should I go into a higher level?
I think that's very helpful. Perhaps you could give us an idea about the volume of waste that this plant will treat relative to DF law and other options for low activity waste, just ballpark.
Okay, I'll leave low activity waste to Ricky if he wants to speak up, but I'll speak specifically to high level waste, if I may. Where we are right now, roughly about 5% is in the high level waste, will be processed through the high level waste program. Not all of the waste will be able to be processed as we're initially configuring the current high level waste facility. What that means is the high level waste tanks, sludges, et cetera, have variability in them. So we do anticipate in the out years, probably 2040, 2045 timeframe, where before that, we'll be looking to provide facility modifications to handle the waste as we go forward. So that's why we developed, in accordance with what Savannah Riverside did, is a range of high-level waste acceptance criteria, which Tank Waste Operations, Ricky's group, will be providing to us. We have process limits that we'll be adhering to within the high-level waste facility, and we're working together on point of compliance, which is where we sample to make sure that the waste we're receiving we can process in accordance with our documentation, which is nuclear safety, environmental, things of that nature. So
Okay, that's very helpful. Mia has a question.
I just wanted to clarify, did you say that you're something about the summer and the pre-treatment facility looking at options for what to do with it? Did I hear you correctly?
That's correct. Again, no official decision has been made what to do with the pre-treat facility. It's still part of the process, but I'm going forward with a direct feed high-level waste mission, the high-level waste mission, which envision using the pre-treatment facility. What we're looking to do is to possibly reuse parts of that for various reasons, things of that nature. There are a number of really high-quality tank vessels in the pretreatment facility, and that's what's being reviewed. We've went out to an independent reviewer to help coordinate that. It's with the vendor is actually going through preparations to develop a final report and provide us the initial draft at the end of this month, early February. So we want to go forward with it in a very deliberate manner to make sure that if there are parts of the facility that may continue to be used in the DFHLW mission, that we will use that. But there may be some other issues, or not the issues, but other uses, excuse me, such as maybe mock-up facilities, things of that nature. But that's what's being discussed.
Will that report be publicly available?
I'll have to find out about that. I cannot envision that it would not be. But again, too, it's to help influence the decision that our management will make on what to do with it going forward. But that'll be directly tied into the continuing DFHLW mission.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions, please? Okay, so in where we are right now going forward, what we do have a very vigorous 2025 plan going forward. Obviously, safe continued operations, heavy emphasis on design, and low risk of rework. Right now, we're planning to complete 90% designs and various 60 and 30% design reviews of systems going up to that. We're looking to do 29 over-the-top equipment placements, such as the vehicle or the vessel that you see in the lower right-hand corner. Looking to mid to late February to actually start putting more equipment into the facility. A lot of that will be weather dependent. Winds right now this time of year are a factor, plus the cold weather, potential snow, things like that. We do plan to start concrete placements again. That'll be probably March timeframe. We're planning 12 for the year. Also continue to work off on the non-conformance reports, condition reports, and implementing lessons learned. Just a quick factoid, the contractor has looked at over 700 lessons learned from across the global vitrification process in our country and others. They've actually completed initial reviews of 500 and implemented 254 lessons learned into the design. And we are working on a continuing basis with our counterparts in tank waste ops to make sure that we share technical details. One thing that Bechtel has done, they are working closely, and the beauty of it is the chief engineer for the new contractor coming on under Ricky's group is the same individual that was working with us to develop the waste acceptance criteria and point of compliance. So that effort and that integration will continue. We're also doing an integrated mission along with the Hanford or with the site infrastructure division with regards to power, water needs, things of that nature. And then also our sister facility, the low activity waste facility going forward. So it's an exciting year. We have a lot of work planned, and we plan to, again, safely complete the designs of 11 facilities. continue low risk or rework construction, over the top placement of equipment, and again, de-risking the project. That's pretty much HLW in a snapshot. Any questions, please? Okay.
We have a question from Esteban.
Yes, sir.
Yes, hi, Tom. Thank you. Hi, this is Esteban. You mentioned the Savannah Riverside and different other sites of lesson learned and bringing all these staffers that I think have worked on this and the busy schedule you got coming up. So what's one of the biggest things, especially I think, and you mentioned, I forgot the number about lessons learned. What is it that you're, especially when it comes to the high level waste, right? Because I think it's a big issue on how process goes about it, and what are the biggest things I think from all these sites that are the knowledge that you're bringing forward to try to implement here at the Hanford site?
That's a good question. Thank you. Right now, what we're looking at mainly is DFLAW and the issues they're facing now in the commissioning phase. Our goal is to identify those more earlier in the HLW phase, so that we're going to be doing more component testing, mock-up testing. That's also been a big recommendation from Sellafield, where they had a number of problems. Also bring in an operations viewpoint of the systems going forward. And we do, Bechtel did bring in a senior operations manager, and we're going through a process called constructability, testability, operability, maintainability system, or CTOMS. What that does is we try to have people with an operator's mentality to work with the design engineers to make sure that the systems will function, but they also have a direct input into the mock-up facilities, such that what we're working towards, excuse me. So what that means is more enhanced facility acceptance testing, or factory acceptance testing, more interface with the design engineers, operations, things of that nature. And then as far as what we're concerned about, obviously, is making sure that the designs also we produce are safe and that we stay within our operating parameters. I hope that answered your question, Esteban.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Maya, please.
Hi, my question is actually for Bill. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the take cover that occurred in December around the ammonia tank, and what happened, what is occurring now, and how you're going to move forward in terms of ammonia testing, since you had to call that off.
Yeah, great question. So when we started the testing, we had a number of leaks. So just to be clear, when we received the ammonia, we only received enough to simply test the system. So we didn't fill anything in the into the piping, into the tanks. It was just we tested the system, found a number of leaks. We were not able to repair them. So just to put this in perspective, we had did a leak test of the ammonia system. However, ammonia has a very small particle size, and so the method we used for testing it was not effective. And therefore, when the contractor came out, like I said, they have a specialized team that does actually just, before you could receive the ammonia, they come out and they do the testing. Found a number of leaks. We decided that, hey, we need to go back and fix the system. So they left. So on the what happened on the release, or the take cover alarm, was we had a reading that was above our limit. We monitored it and found that it was true. So they decided to do a take cover alarm, and then ultimately the levels they basically went away. Sorry, I can't speak. And so the tank cover was removed. There were very small readings that ultimately we didn't necessarily need to take a take cover, but we were surprised that it happened. So right now we've done a complete review of the system and elected as abundance of caution to go through and start replacing a number of the gaskets. Let me see if I have the numbers, but I had the numbers right here. There's 85 gaskets that we're replacing. We're going to go ahead and replace the gasking seals on, and you know what? Let me hang on a second. Let me bring it up. I have it right here. I inadvertently closed it. Oh, that's not it. Apologize for that. Okay. So I'm sorry. So there's a total of 127 gaskets that we're planning on removing. There's another type of valves that we're gonna rebuild, and that's 24. And then there's a third type of valve. There's 16 that we're planning on doing. So basically, as abundance of caution, we went through and decided to spend some time and replace all of the gaskets to make sure that that we felt that we needed to make sure that we could successfully pass the leak test. So right now we're hoping to have that done by mid-February. Hopefully that answered your question.
So you're expecting to, when are you expecting to try the ammonia test again? Is that mid-February?
Well, that's what we're hoping for. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
And one of the problems too is that the team that does the leak test is very busy. So you have to schedule a couple weeks ahead of them. So our goal is be done by mid-February, and then and we've already scheduled with the vendor, but if we start losing schedule on that, that could push that out. Just on the vendor's availability.
We've got 3 questions in the queue. Laura Feldman.
Yeah. Hi, Bill. I've been reading, I'm always reading stuff, but I was reading about Sellafield in the UK the other day, and that it's gone like $216 billion over budget. It's still not decommissioned, and it won't be until about 21-25. So I'm kind of wondering what you're learning from Sellafield, as you mentioned, things that you're learning from other sites around the world.
Yes, that's HLW. I'll turn it over to Tom.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. What we are learning with regards to the Sellafield, like I think I indicated, there were a number of issues that they were working through, such as throughput not meeting design, operability of the systems where they went to reach for a valve, but it was on the backside, hard to access. Those are the types of things that we're trying to work out. So really what it came down to is that they now have a very robust mock-up system, things of that nature, where they can train their crews in a clean and relatively clean environment as they prove the procedures for maintenance and operations, things of that nature. So at a high level, that's pretty much what we're doing is, one, making sure that as we go forward, the systems that are being designed are basically operator friendly, my words, but still be safe, with regards to the right valves, the right components, throughput, also orientation of the piping to make sure we minimize the number of dead legs and things of that nature, or low points in the system that may preclude safe operation in the future. I hope I answered your question.
Yeah, good to hear. I just wonder what your budget is looking like for.
Right now, the president's budget is for 24. Again, we're in a continuing resolution, so we look back at the for 25 for the 24, which is right around $600 million. And that's the president's budget from 24, carrying over through a continuing resolution. And with the change in administrations and restructuring of government, I'm not going to hazard a guess.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. But answer to your question, we do have sufficient funding to carry on the work that we have planned for 25. And then also, because we are in negotiations, we have a multi-year work plans laid out. So the work is progressing from 25 now through 30 with a known path forward. So we're not segmenting things. So one year flows into the other. And then we're able to bring back from the right or from out years into in years if the funding's available.
Next question from Stephen Bedrick.
Hi. Thanks so much for the informative briefing. I just wanted to make sure I was hearing correctly about the ammonia thing. So we weren't able to figure out what the source of that was. So that's hence the mass replacement of gaskets and whatnot. The sort of the assumption was it was a gasket problem, or was there ever more clarity on what actually was the source of the ammonia leak?
So we had found several sources of the leak with the gaskets. And then since we had tried and we're not able to get through it, we took an abundance of caution to say, okay, let's look at other valves that are using these gaskets, and let's just replace them to get ahead of it, to make sure that the next time we come out, we don't have any other problems.
Got it. Yeah, so there had been gasket. Okay, thanks.
If I may interject too, this is one of the things we're also looking at within the HLW facilities, because the facility is roughly 40% complete when the work was paused. And so we are also, we call it extended condition. We're also looking at our existing systems, one, to see what the shelf life of the installed gaskets are, and also those that we have in storage, things like that. So we can hopefully preclude that going forward. And that'll be part of the aging and obsolescence reviews that we have kicked off. So I just want to make sure that, again, lessons learned real time, and we're right now integrating that into our planning.
Okay, Mike Freeman.
Yes, I would like to go to the 100,000-foot level if I could. You alluded to the concern that I've had from the beginning, and that is that the mixture of materials that are out there waiting to be treated is so broad that process design has got to be fantastical. You alluded to the fact that the HLW plant was going to accept only qualified waste. And so as I understand the problem, you've got a tank farm, and in a tank is supernatant that is clear or can be made clear, salt cake, and sludges. But the bigger scope of the problem should also include the ground underneath the tank, the grounds that were used as dumping grounds, equipment, and possibly the reactors. Which, out of this laundry list of things, what do you foresee being the ultimate feed to HLW, and what needs to wait for the 2040s?
Tom,
Sorry,
you're on
Tom,
mute.
you're muted.
Okay, just the way you like it, Bill, huh? With regards to the waste treatment project, our plant project is solely focused on tank waste. With regards to residual soil contamination, not only within the or in and around the tanks, but also elsewhere on site, we would have to make sure that we work within our existing permits as to site-wide I'm talking about. And then we'd have to integrate with other projects. But right now, we've not looked at soils underneath the tanks as part of this process. But I do see need, as you've just indicated, that would have to be addressed going forward. So I'm not trying to be evasive. It's just that right now it's not in our planning. But obviously, if and when what the final disposition of the tanks are themselves after they've been emptied, that's when that issue would come up.
Okay, so coming back to the question, the HLW process as you see it now is going to be focused on the salt portion, or salt and part of the sludge, or what?
Answer to that part of the question, it may be both. With regards to that, again, it depends on how we get our waste from tank waste ops. Obviously, we'd have to be able to mobilize it and move it, so there would be some dilution of that. And then going forward, one of the things was mentioned before for a high-level waste effluent management treatment facility, EMF. That is something that's planned as a separate entity and possibly a new evaporator type system in the 2040 timeframe. But that would be under Ricky Bang's group, Tank Waste Ops. So again, that's part of the integration going forward. Ricky, did you want to add anything to that?
No, Tom, thanks for covering that.
Okay. That's all I have. And I hope I answered your question, sir.
Okay, I guess if there's no more questions, Gary, what's next?
We've got Jason Capron in the wings. He's going to be talking about some of the rods and milestones for 100K, 100N, and 324. We've got about, looks like almost 20 minutes, 21 minutes left on this block of time. Jason doesn't have any slides, so I will stop sharing what I have. And Jason, you're up, my friend.
Certainly. Quick sound check. Gary, can you hear me okay?
Sound just fine.
Good deal. Usually works well in here. So again, good morning, everyone. As Gary introduced me, I'm Jason Capron. I'm the Senior Technical Advisor for our River and Plateau group. This is the group that deals with soil and groundwater remediation, particularly outside of the tank farm areas. What I wanted to give you an update on was on our cleanup decision-making efforts for several notable areas. Notable because we were expecting they could be coming into the public review space pretty soon, so wanted to be sure you all were aware of where we were at on those. I tried to strike that balance between timing of what I have left here and giving you enough information. Since some of you I know, some of you I don't, just want to be sure you have the right context of it. Feel free, pop in anytime with questions, as kind of 3 topic areas, and I'll do my best to keep my eye out for raised hands and whatnot. So let's just start with 300-296. 300-296 is the designation for the waste site underneath the 324 building. This is a waste site where there's high activity material present. I believe you all have some background on that and some awareness of it. I won't give too much exposition. What we've been doing in the past year is developing a focused feasibility study to evaluate a modified remedial action approach for remediating the soil underneath that building. In a nutshell, the approach that was previously envisioned was that all of the material that required remote excavation could be excavated through the building floor. And as we kind of got some more information and things last year, we didn't think that was fully the case. We were expecting that at least some portion of remedial action would have to occur once the building came down, which wasn't really quite in line with how it was originally envisioned. So we've been doing an evaluation to basically just evaluate sequencing. The overall plan is absolutely still excavation and removal of the soil. It's just a sequencing question for the remote excavation piece and how that's done. So we completed that focused feasibility study last year, or we completed a draft of it last year. In tandem with that and the desire to kind of keep things moving, we were developing a proposed plan. What that proposed plan is really just the summary of the focused feasibility study. That's something we use to communicate to the public, to request input and comment on the proposed modifications to it. Right now, that proposed plan is with EPA. It's something we've been working with them in development, but they're going through some additional review on it, expecting feedback from them. Currently, coordinating with EPA, our plan is that proposed plan will be available for public review by summer. We're hoping a little bit sooner, but certainly by summer of this year, we'd like to get that proposed plan out for public review. Of course, there's some advanced lead on that as we get a little bit more specific date, but that's my best target right now. I'll just speak to the milestone piece with that. There's no milestone directly on the proposed plan itself, but there certainly are milestones on the 324 building and the waste site. Those were affected as soon as we knew we couldn't do the remediation under the previous approach. So what we will be doing is working with EPA as we modify the approach to update any milestones as are appropriate based on the new approach, but there's no specific modification to those yet. So that was the fast version. Any question just on the 300 area piece? Otherwise, I'll move on to the K piece. Go for it, Esteban.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. So you said right now kind of everything's stalled and based in you're collaborating with EPA on the reviews and see what they say about all the reports you've come up with, right?
I wouldn't say stalled, in that we are still doing work on 324 building that we can do that is the same no matter what. Basically, we're doing what work we can that isn't affected by the documentation. What we had planned was we'd need to get the decision documentation to ultimately be able to move forward to the end point. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and then you said, and then like, what is it, that summer? That's when you're looking at for like the, yeah.
That would be, summer would be the proposed plan. Obviously, we get the input from the public, and then from there, we work with EPA to do an actual update to the record of decision so that we can go forward with the implementation, and things like that flow from there into how we actually do the implementation. But the step for you guys to be really aware of is certainly by summer, could be earlier, but by summer, we're expecting that proposed plan to come out.
All right, thank you.
Certainly. Jeff.
Jason, why EPA instead of ecology? We're always trying to figure out who's
in truth, it's
overseeing
both.
what.
The designated lead regulatory agency for the 300 area is EPA. So EPA is the primary recipient. EPA also has a little bit more authority in the CERCLA rods. My world is mostly that CERCLA side decision making. However, ecology is a support agency on this, and they also, there's some nuances with RCRA units in it. So we are also coordinating with ecology. I just put a little more of the emphasis on EPA because they're the designated lead.
Okay, thank you.
No, great question. Okay, seeing and fair game to return to 300 area later if anyone thinks of anything else they want to ask on that. So I'm going to pivot up to 100K area. So in the 100K area, we've been doing remediation up there under multiple interim action records of decision since kind of the late 1990s. We embarked on a process to update to kind of a more comprehensive ROD that addresses both soil and groundwater. Actually, we started first in 2010, and we've been working for obviously over a decade on bringing in new information to do updates for that. Last year, we completed the remedial investigation feasibility study process. For those of you who may not be familiar, remedial investigation is the part of the process where you look at the data, you assess your risks, you say what's the problem that needs to be addressed. And the feasibility study is the part of the process that actually looks at more the engineering side of it, of how would you address those risks? You know, what are the options you can do? What are the trade-offs of that? And it seeks to advance a remedial alternative. We completed that remedial investigation feasibility study last year for 100K area.
Jason,
please, Jeff.
Could you just clarify what 100K is? I mean, there was a
Oh,
reactor
certainly.
there, and what exactly
Certainly,
is this
take it
part?
even.
Yeah.
Yeah, so 100K area is one of the production areas. So historically, where the actual production reactors were doing the fuel enrichment out on Hanford, these were along the river. If you're going downriver, 100K area is actually the second area you'd come to. You'd first go by BC, and then you'd come to K area. K area had 2 reactors present in it, and as you all are probably familiar with K, you know, those right by the river. There are multiple groundwater contaminant plumes associated with the historic operations there. There's soil contamination. So it's been an area we've been doing active remediation, like I say, since the late 1990s. Does that help fill that in a little bit for Kay? Thank you. And I could give a much longer version of that, but I won't. So we've been working we did complete those remedial investigation feasibility study documents last year. In tandem with that, we were beginning to prepare the proposed plan. Again, what the proposed plan is about is really summarizing the entire body of the remedial investigation feasibility study is available for the public to see, but the proposed plan is specifically meant to make it a little bit more reader friendly, make it a little bit easier to get to the relevant information quicker. We've been working towards developing that to be able to release to the public, which would be the next step before we can go ahead and do an updated record of decision. We hit a little bit of a bump last year in that there were some updates to some potential updates to some of the cleanup levels, most specifically for hexavalent chromium. And so right now we're talking with EPA about how and when. There's a couple of places within the cleanup process where those can be contemplated. We're working with EPA on what's the best time to incorporate those and consider that. We haven't decided yet. Again, I emphasize EPA there because EPA is the lead area for the 100K area, but we do also work with ecology as the supporting agency on that. It's really a 3-way discussion. So unfortunately, that's making kind of the public review time a little bit to be determined. That doesn't directly affect what we're doing right now. We are already doing interim remedial action, and we weren't really expecting dramatic changes with the updates to the rods. So it certainly doesn't affect, like we have an ongoing pump and treat system out at K area. Things like that are going to continue while we figure out what the best timing to go ahead and do this is. So my message basically is there, stay tuned. I think it may be a little bit longer before we get a proposed plan out to the public, but it is still something that's on our docket. We're just looking at the right time to do that. Similar thing, there's no milestone directly on that actual proposed plan effort. There's more broader milestones for the K area that may or may not be affected by the updates anyway. This is something we've been aware of for a while that we'll be doing updates, so I don't necessarily see dramatic milestone impacts there. But as decisions are actually finalized, we work with EPA to define if there's any new milestones that need to be defined or anything like that, but otherwise no impacts at this point. Does that help for K area? Any questions on K? Esteban, go for it.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. Of course, I think one of the concerns and the big thing is what you said, and especially when you mentioned the groundwater and, you know, being by the river, you know, how the reactors, what's like the impact on the river and everything and what's happening that you're seeing pop up there while, you know, you're doing all this work out there?
Sure, that's because there are groundwater plumes in K area. That is why we've had a pump and treat system out in that area for a while. So that pump and treat system will continue to operate. What's that's really heavily targeted at is hexavalent chromium. There's multiple contaminant plumes out there, but hexavalent chromium, one of the more mobile ones. So that's where a lot of the pump and treat focuses. There are other contaminants. I just emphasized that one. We will continue doing that pump and treat. I don't like to be pre-decisional towards the final rod, but I fully expect that the final rod is going to continue to include pump and treat as a component of it. It's just a question of kind of updating some of the cleanup levels to be sure that the eventual endpoint we hit at K area for aquifer restoration and things like that is the correct endpoint. Does that help?
Yes, thank you.
Certainly. Okay. I'll pivot to in area then, and in area is kind of a similar story to K. Let me highlight the differences. So in area is actually the next area downstream from the 100K area, again, right by the river. In area was a little bit different reactor. It came later, so a significantly different design. So some of the contaminants and whatnot associated with in area are very different. Most notably, in does not have as significant of a hexavalent chromium contaminant plume as K area, though hexavalent chromium is still present there, but nothing like at K. In area is another one where we've been doing interim remediation since the 1990s, and we started on a remedial investigation feasibility study process quite some time ago. It, through sheer coincidence, it kind of came neck and neck with the K area, and they've been moving kind of largely in parallel as we get to the final stages. We did complete the remedial investigation feasibility study late last year. The same concept of potential updates to cleanup levels applies there, although far less significantly at K area just because of the difference in the contaminants. In area is an ecology lead area. So again, we work with both EPA and ecology, but more of the emphasis is on ecology for 100N. So we're working with ecology to decide how we move forward on that. One thing that ecology did request is we had some data, as you can imagine, when you're dealing with a decade-long remedial investigation feasibility study process and data is dynamic, how you incorporate new information in that process with large documents is kind of a fun challenge for me. We did have some things that came up that ecology asked us to incorporate fairly late in the process. We decided with ecology that the best way to do that would be via an addendum to the remedial investigation feasibility study. So we've been working to prepare a formal addendum. If you saw a remedial investigation feasibility study come out last year, we're anticipating that there will be an addendum to modify that with new information. All of that ultimately gets rolled up in a proposed plan that goes to the public. Again, a little bit TBD on that one, but because it's is in some ways a little bit simpler than some of what we're dealing with K, I'm optimistic that we'll still get a proposed plan out for in area. I don't want to be totally committal, but I'm optimistic that we can do it by the end of the year. Ecology, EPA, and myself are all motivated to try and make that happen. It will probably be towards the end of this year if we're able to do that. Similar thing on in area, we're going to continue to do some interim work. In doesn't have an active pump and treat because it has a different contaminant system. A little less impactful there, but we do very much still want to get that record of decision out because it lets us do some good updates on some remedy components we're doing. So we're still eager to get it out. We just want to be sure we do it with the right timing. Again, same thing on milestones, not a milestone directly on the proposed plan, but new milestones may be defined as we roll out a new record of decision. Jeff, go for it.
Is there anything in these rods that would be the least bit controversial from a public perspective?
Subjective. Certainly, having worked with rods for a long time, obviously different folks have different perspectives about what should be done. That's the entire purpose. So under the CERCLA process, we consider a range of criteria, but one of those criteria is very specifically the consideration of public input, is what's the public preference for some of the things. So I don't necessarily want to weigh in on what different folks' perceptions are. You know, different folks may think, oh, you should clean up more, or you should consider this alternative instead. So I don't know about controversial, but it absolutely is a very important point for the public to weigh in and offer perspective on what they would like to see done for an area. What we present, Jeff, is we present an analysis of what we think the best alternatives are, as well as what we propose as the preferred alternative and why we propose that one. But the public can then offer a pretty big range of input. There absolutely have been cases at Hanford where public input has affected where the remedy ended up going. So I encourage everyone, treat the public review process very seriously for what it's supposed to be there for.
But having said that, this area of technology development and cleanup progress is fairly mature, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, the thing that I think the thing that I would expect that folks would probably have the most energy on is the primary contaminant we're dealing with in an area is strontium-90. And there's really not a very amenable way to get strontium-90 out of groundwater. You know, it's not real suitable to extraction and things like that. So those plumes, kind of no matter how aggressively we try and treat that strontium-90 is going to be in that groundwater for a while. And I think that's probably the thing that most, when you first read, you're like, wow, that seems like a long time for that to be there, because even though technologies may be mature, that ability to actually get those specific circumstances of strontium out of groundwater are quite a bit more challenging. You know, it's not difficult to treat once you get it out. It's the extraction that's the problem.
Okay, that's helpful perspective. Esteban.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. And seizing on that comment, Jason, I think I was at Chihuahua High School after Ryan, since he's a science expert and, trying to explain this science stuff to all these high schoolers. One of the big things is that how would you, when it comes to all that's, all these chemicals, and I think Michael, for asking them, it's difficult, trying to explain to the public, and I'm still trying to see who develops the cores, either Portland State or Washington State on it, right? But how would you say, in like with the comment that you made, what is it that has influenced that cleanup, especially from the public education or the public comments section that you have had and in learning this whole process?
I think a lot of it too, public generally, because sometimes we're just dealing with hard trade-offs. The cases where I've seen it is where it's kind of like, well, you could do this or this. Both of them have a pro and a con element to them. And DOE may think that the pros kind of outweigh one more than the other, but with the public input, and when I say public, I should also be clear that from a CERCLA standpoint, that also includes our tribal partners. That's where it can kind of be like, well, did you really put enough weight on this? We think maybe this would be the better way to go. So that's usually where I've seen is where decisions, aren't obvious and binary, but where there's multiple factors that affect it, that it kind of puts maybe more emphasis on certain factors, if that makes sense. Mia?
Yes, thank you.
Hi, Jason. I'm curious if you're still looking at using an appetite barrier at, I believe it's 100N, and what that would be used for.
Certainly. So that's actually one of the more focal things of that addendum that I alluded to, Mia, is really to consider whether or not that appetite barrier is really needed. So quick nutshell, the appetite barrier, currently there is an appetite barrier. The purpose of the appetite is as strontium-90 passively kind of just flows up to that barrier, that appetite sequesters strontium-90. It grabs the strontium-90 that's just kind of moving up to it out of the water. The question has been, relative to some of the trade-offs of that appetite barrier, of maintaining that in there, whether or not it's really providing enough benefit relative to some of the challenges it presents. That's specifically what we kind of talked with ecology and EPA about assessing in an addendum. So Mia, what we did in there, and I'm getting into the weeds a little bit, but I want you to understand because it's a great question. We brought in some of the newer data that's available for that area to really say, is the appetite barrier providing value? That appetite barrier is entirely about the strontium-90 plume.
And is that something you can remove later, or is that there forever?
It can be done, but it certainly represents a lot of challenges and considerations, because you're talking injected appetite near to a shoreline, engineering challenges to excavating in that kind of area.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Certainly. Stephen.
This is maybe a background question. Appetite barrier. It sounds like that's not a physical barrier. It sounds like that's something that's being injected into the soil, like you were just saying,
correct.
To sort of competitively absorb the strontium-90.
You got it. That's okay. Just what it is. It's a phosphate solution injected down in multiple borings in close proximity. It's a chemical barrier basically.
Does it end up in the groundwater?
No, I mean, well, in the sense that it is injected into the groundwater, but obviously a less mobile chemical that sits there in near proximity to the wells. But of course, when you do an injection like that, you can get a little bit of an initial pulse of things because you're putting mass down a column and what that can do. But in the long term, no, it's meant to be a stable material that stays in that configuration.
Okay, in a way that the strontium-90 isn't then.
Correct. Yeah, it just becomes a collection point for strontium-90 there around those wells, where what otherwise would very gradually move towards the river, it tends to stay there in that barrier near the river. The question is whether or not when you look at some of those challenges, is it really doing that enough to be worth maintaining that near the river? Because
Of
you also do
course.
have to do some, like refreshing on it, if you will, occasional re-injections and things like that to make sure that it's continuing to function as intended.
And
Okay,
then,
we
sorry,
need to wind this up,
Okay.
stay on schedule. Jason, thank you very much for excellent presentation and your colleagues. Gary Younger, there is a rumor going around, and I don't know if it's true or not, but I wanted to take the opportunity to thank you and your team for all the work you've done to support the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board.
Thank you. It's always DOE's pleasure and honor to come and visit with this board and provide a lot of great inputs to a lot of the work that we've been doing lately.
Okay, so with that, we're going to break until 10:30. We'll reconvene back at 10:30. And again, thank you, DOE guys. Okay, it's 10:30. Let's reconvene the meeting. The next item on the agenda is an update from the Energy Communities Alliance, ECA. David Replug from Tri-Cities. David? So Mark, is David logged on?
I'm looking for him.
He is logged on. He's currently muted. At least it's showing him.
There he is. I think he's coming up. David? And Mark, you have the slides. Could you maybe bring those up? I think David is having some problems logging on.
Technical difficulties.
Technical difficulties. There you go. So we might have to adjust the agenda, Max, which would probably mean you're going to have to pick it up.
Okay. I am going to see if David can come back in a second here, but Matt and I were going to be at the ODA presentation slot here, going to be talking about a couple things. We can dive into it now if you're okay with that. And I apologize, I'm under the weather. Glad this is a virtual meeting. So I am not spreading my germs to anybody except my own computer screen as I speak here. Hendrickson, are you ready? Matt, are you ready to pull up the slideshow? Look at that. Right on cue. Matt's
I'm working on it here.
Yeah, thank you. So Matt and I, for our update to the board, we are going to focus specifically on the holistic negotiation outcomes and thought that would be a good place for us to spend some time. Considering, oh, Dave's got his hand. Dave.
Yeah,
Can you
I
hear us?
apologize. I'm not. Yeah, can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah.
Yeah, somehow, of course, right when I was called upon, my Teams froze up, and right now my camera doesn't seem to be working, but at least I can see and hear you guys.
Okay. Are you able to share your slides, David? Or could we try and do that? Mark, you have the slides, don't you, that David shared with us?
Yeah, I think he does, because right
I
now
do. Just give me just a second.
Okay.
Right now for my Teams, it doesn't allow me to share or to turn my camera on. I'm not sure why.
Oh. Right when we call upon you in front of the audience, these things
Yeah,
happen.
Dave, I just changed your permissions too, so double check that.
Maybe I'll give by way of while we're getting set up here. You know, people may remember David Replog came to our meeting in Hood River in 2023 and gave us sort of thoughts from his perspective working for Tridec and Hanford Communities. And David can, of course, speak for himself, but just by way of introduction and welcoming, he works, as I understand it, for two organizations, both the Tri-Cities Development as well as Hanford Communities. I, just by sort of nature of the job, have heard from the Energy Communities Alliance, or ECA, which is a national organization that represents communities like Richland, like the Tri-Cities, that host EM sites. They gave good presentation and have a sort of a white paper out on sort of thoughts and recommendations and concepts for the incoming administration. And it felt topical and relevant today to invite someone like David Replog, with his background, his experience, sort of where he sits and who he represents, to come speak to this board about ECA and sort of the Hanford perspective, local communities perspective, and what this might mean. So, and what the recommendations are, sort of the thought process and incoming administration. We're all kind of speculating what's going to happen. Nobody really knows, but I thought we have some good insight from David here. The slides are now showing, and David, if you want to dive in, and we can control the slides here. Mark, I think you're controlling the slides. We can go for you. We can hear
He's
you
got his
okay?
presentation. That's it. It's all him.
Oh, it's David.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I'll stop talking and just pass it over to you. Dive in.
Okay, well, thanks, Max. And yeah, it seems like now it's letting me share my screen, but it's still not letting me. Oh, no, maybe it's letting me turn my camera on too. Give me a second. Here. Well, if it doesn't work here, I won't belabor the effort here, but you guys can still hear me? All right.
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Go ahead.
Okay.
And we can see your presentation.
Okay, that's what's most important anyway. But thanks for the introduction, Max. And I might just take a minute to give a little bit of background about the three organizations that are sort of involved or that I'm involved with. First is Hanford Communities. Hanford Communities was formed in the mid-1990s to represent the local governments in the Tri-City area on Hanford cleanup issues, and to also provide information about Hanford cleanup to members of the Tri-City community. At that time, there was a lot of uncertainty about what Hanford cleanup was going to look like. DOE was still having some real challenges with kind of lifting the veil of secrecy from decades of national security related work. And the local governments really felt like they needed to be represented and to have a voice. And so that's why Hanford Communities was created. We have an elected official from 7 local governments, all 4 cities, both counties, and the Port of Benton in the Tri-City area on our governing board. TriDec is the lead economic development organization for the Tri-City area, but really began more focused on federal advocacy related to Hanford in the early 1960s. And so over time, we've evolved to do more of the traditional economic development related work. A lot of what we do still is very focused on Hanford and Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and other kind of federal issues in the Tri-City region. And so I work really closely with congressional offices, sometimes with DOE and with contractors and with state agencies and other federal agencies as well. So I serve as vice president for federal programs for TriDec. And then I'm also on the executive board for Energy Communities Alliance. And Energy Communities Alliance is a national organization that represents a whole host of communities with DOE sites nearby. And so anywhere from West Valley, New York, to Oak Ridge, Tennessee, to Savannah River, South Carolina, Carlsbad, New Mexico, Idaho Falls, Idaho, and Paducah, Portsmouth, basically any DOE site that you hear about, there's a community that is a part of Energy Communities Alliance. It was formed about the same time that Hanford Communities was, and really to give that kind of national voice, thinking that all these communities that have that DOE presence in their backyard have some shared priorities, and there's some value in everybody coming together and speaking with one voice as much as possible. And so Brent Gary, who is the mayor of the city of West Richland, is the chair of the Energy Communities Alliance board right now too, which is great that we have, the Hanford site being represented at that level. He had a chance to introduce Secretary Granholm at a conference last year because of that role and things like that. So hopefully that provides a little bit of background. I'll just call Energy Communities Alliance ECA. We're all in the acronym world anyway. And ECA does a number of different things relating to kind of offering advice or suggestions related, related especially to the Office of Environmental Management, National Nuclear Security Administration, or NNSA, as well as the Office of Nuclear Energy. And one of the things that they do every 4 years, regardless of whether it's a new administration or an incumbent, is to put together a transition paper that highlights really the organization's priorities for the new administration. And I will quickly go through all of them at a high level here with the next slide, and then go into more detail beyond that. And some of them have probably more relevance to Hanford site than others. And so we'll try to highlight where there's a particular nexus or focus that relates to Hanford cleanup as well. And I would also just note that the presentation was put together for me by the ECA staff. And so again, it's a holistic kind of perspective on DOE across the country, but there are certainly some elements that are very relevant to the Hanford site as well. So, and I would also add real quick too that all of this transition paper is available on the Energy Communities Alliance website. And so just a quick Google search of Energy Communities Alliance transition paper will bring you right to it. And so the 8 recommendations are: first, ensure safe and available disposal capability is available for all waste aligned with local community needs. Reassess use of in-state contracting. Ensure regulatory agreements are reasonably achievable and balance short and long-term needs. Improve workforce planning to address EM brain drain and ensure EM is well integrated with other DOE programs. Maintain robust local community engagement. Continue to focus on economic/energy development benefits from cleanup. Clarify that DOE will fully investigate and remediate hazardous materials discovered at completed sites. And then last, reconstitute a dedicated nuclear waste organization within the Department of Energy. So diving in on the first one, it really is kind of focused. I think we all know that there's a lot of waste that's out there, including at Hanford and at other sites across the country, that doesn't really have a long-term home. And I think we also all know that the Yucca Mountain Repository is still currently the law of the land. Congress passed a law determining that Yucca Mountain was going to be our deep geological repository. But for a variety of different reasons, that hasn't really come to fruition. Much of it has been constructed, but some of the permitting and some of the construction remains, and Congress seems to have no appetite to continue funding that effort. And so until a long-term solution is determined, whether it's Yucca or somewhere else, that waste is essentially just going to sit at all of the sites where it's currently at. And at Hanford, we have what I believe is probably the largest volume of defense high-level waste, which is supposed to be destined for the Deep Geological Repository, as well as some spent nuclear fuel, also that's currently being stored, I believe, in T-Plant. And so, and I'm going to kind of come back around to this point later too, because ECA has been working with DOE, especially the Office of Nuclear Energy, on some consent-based siting efforts that I can also speak to. But on the bottom right bullet, the Nuclear Waste Policy Act has not been amended, and so DOE needs a legal framework to also allow for the establishment of interim storage sites. Again, right now, the law of the land is the Nuclear Waste Policy Act that determines Yucca Mountain is the Deep Geological Repository. And if we were to change approach, either to identify a different long-term deep geological repository or to look at interim storage sites in the meantime, that would still take congressional action to authorize that to move forward. And feel free to ask any questions along the way. Otherwise, I'll just keep going, and hopefully we'll have some time for some questions at the end as well. So this one is reassessing the use of in-state contracting. I'm not going to dive super far into this one. It's, of course, to some degree relevant at Hanford, but I don't think there's a particular Hanford focus here. I think some of us will remember when Ann White was the Assistant Secretary for the Office of Environmental Management, and she really kind of instituted this approach with in-state contracting, where the contractors basically had negotiated with the department on specific end states for their scope of work, and then were awarded their fee and were tasked with their work based on that. I think some folks believe that it's not been as effective as what had been the kind of the method before, which was the cost plus incentive fee, where essentially the contractors just charge their costs to the federal government, and then based on their score, how well they perform the work as determined by DOE, they receive an award fee above and beyond their costs. And so ECA has had some discussions already with DOE about this, and has talked with DOE about some of the improvements that they have been working to implement to the contracting models. The next item is ensuring regulatory agreements are reasonable, achievable, and balance short and long-term needs. And I think this one is a pretty big one for the Hanford site. We were sort of the first, I think, of the major cleanup sites to have a very robust regulatory agreement to direct Hanford cleanup. That was the tri-party agreement. And I think, well, first, I guess I'll just provide the context, and then I'll get into a little bit of editorial. But the context is that regulatory agreements are critical to driving cleanup work and ensuring DOE is compliant with the law. However, regulatory agreements sometimes can hinder or even stop cleanup progress at sites. The solution is that DOE and regulatory parties should seek to be flexible while complying with the law and human health and safety. Regulatory agreements should contain concrete milestones and requirements that can be measured for success and met, and agreements must balance the short and long-term needs unique to the site. And so I've been at TRIDEC since 2017, and when I started, there was just a lot of friction all around in my experience. There was friction between the Department of Energy and its regulators, especially the state of Washington Department of Ecology. And Tom, thanks for the note. Yeah, you're right. It's I was thinking of the sludge is that tea plant. But there was friction between DOE and the Department of Ecology. There was friction, I think, between many in the community, including TRIDEC and Hanford communities, to some degree with the state. And at the time, we felt that there were, and I think there's friction because DOE had agreed to milestones that were frankly not realistically achievable with realistically achievable or predictable budget numbers. And so what I think we've seen since then in the last few years is a movement that we, meaning ECA, Hanford Communities, and TRIDEC, feel like is some humongous steps in the right direction, in a more positive direction. I mean, when you look at, and through ECA, I have had a chance to kind of see what's happening with cleanup at some of the other sites, and it seems like where there's sites where there's alignment between the Department of Energy and its regulators and its key stakeholders, that's where things seem to happen. That's where you actually start making that real cleanup progress. And when you have realistically achievable milestones. And so, for example, with the holistic negotiation settlement agreement that was just kind of finalized recently, I think that's a big step in the right direction toward that alignment on the approach to tank waste treatment. There are parts of it that I don't think we especially love. I'm sure there's other parts of it that others don't love, but in my mind, the thing that's probably most important, the key takeaway, is that there is that alignment. We're continuing to move forward, and that I think if we're going to ultimately be successful in the short term, we need to, be realistic. We need to hold tight on the things that are most important for human health and safety, environmental cleanup, things like that, but also exercise appropriate regulatory discretion when and take that kind of risk-based approach to prioritize in an environment where there is only so many resources out there. One of the things that really, I guess, if you were to say, like, what one thing about Hanford keeps you up at night in terms of getting it cleaned up, it's not necessarily tomorrow or a week from now or 10 years from now, but 30 years from now, when right now we have such incredible support from Patty Murray, Maria Cantwell, Congress Dan Newhouse, the Oregon senators are also very supportive, and others. But we also have sites in Idaho and Tennessee and South Carolina and others that all really care about the overall cleanup program, the Office of Environmental Management. And in 30 years, many of those sites will be cleaned up, or at least largely cleaned up, and there'll be fewer senators and congresspeople that care. And what we don't want is to have this impression that either Hanford cleanup is not investment worthy, that it's not a good use of taxpayer dollars, it doesn't go as far as it should, or that it just is not making enough progress for Congress to continue to invest when you don't have senators from 15 or 14 different states, congresspeople from those states who also care. And so, not that regulatory agreements are going to be the sole factor there, but they can have a role. And I'll pause there. Esteban, go ahead, please.
Yeah, and I think the C's on the point, like I think it's on brain drain, and as a person who's lived there in Richland, and I see, Gary Younger, and I know Gary was, kind of reached out when I had to join the HAB, and one of the things I think the feedback I've gotten, when I left the HAB was that, right, that people feel intimidated, like you said, about, there's that sense of secrecy that I think the Manhattan Project has never left. Not getting the public involved and informing them and educating them about what it's all about, right? So seizing on that and what you said, I think, was great. Right now, where Senator Cantwell, was asking the incoming person that's going to be heading the EPA about, holding the tri-party agreements. But to that note, and like you said, you've been working on this, what is the big takeaway? And I think for me, it's that, right, that as a conflict analyst, that this is not an easy task. This is money that's getting spent, but titling it how it is, and more than anything, educating the folks, because it's not an easy subject. I mean, you guys got the best and brightest, what is it, on those statistics there at PNNL, Richland, but what is it? And I think to me, the biggest thing in the criticism is about that, about your approach to actually educating the public and letting them know of what's happening and building that community sense that this is and look what's happening right now, the big issue about the energy grid, and that instead of having to take care of this, we now want to build more stuff that's just going to contribute more to the contamination and the harm in the local community there. So what's the big problem? To me, I think the big, like you said, at the end is that be a focus about educating and having the community via voice for what's actually happening at Hanford and the progress, right? And what is it that you say that it's keeping from educating the public on what's really happening with the whole cleanup?
Yeah, absolutely. And it is, back to one of your points, it's an extraordinarily complex process to manage Hanford cleanup and cleanup at the other sites as well. And so there's many layers to the successful cleanup. And I see that it's already 10:52. Thanks to my technical difficulties, we're a little bit behind schedule. I'll try to be pretty fast here, but back to your point too, Esteban, about workforce and brain drain. A couple of years ago, there was especially a big focus at DOE on workforce. I think the stat that they used was, at that time, they had something like 10 people in all of DOE EM federal employees, 10 people who are under 30 years of age, which is pretty striking. I mean, obviously, I think most of us, all of us know that the majority of the workforce is contractors, but still EM, the program has thousands of workers across the country and at headquarters, and only 10 of them being under the age of 30, that's pretty striking. And so I know in the Tri-Cities, TriDec has been working really hard to address some of our workforce issues, not only for supporting Hanford Cleanup and Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, but other employers that are in town or looking to move into town, and trying to identify opportunities for us to partner as a community, us to partner with DOE to support some of these efforts. And in fact, Columbia Basin College, along with, I believe, Energy Northwest, received some grant funding from DOE EM last year to help support some of these workforce efforts. But we hope that there's a continued kind of focus on this, because ultimately, if you don't have the workforce, everything from the skilled trades to the project managers to the engineers to the scientists, you can't effectively clean up these sites. Maintaining robust local community engagement. That is also, of course, very key to the Hanford site and to Hanford cleanup. Like I said, back when Hanford Communities was created, there was really, I don't think, the kind of engagement from DOE that many in the community wanted. I grew up in the Tri-Cities. A lot of my friends and family worked at the Hanford site, and to some degree, DOE was kind of the boogeyman in the late 80s, early 90s, and even through the late 90s. But I think they have, in the last couple decades, really done a much better job of kind of communicating. I mean, I'm sure there are certainly ways that they could do better, but they've done a lot more in that community engagement than they used to. And I think they are considered to be kind of the most effective within the DOE program offices in community engagement, compared to some of the other, like NNSA or some of the other program offices within DOE. But that's really going to continue to be super important as we move forward, because we got decades more to go with Hanford. Like I was just saying, it's really complex, and having the communities that are directly impacted, the broader region, understanding what's happening with Hanford cleanup is going to continue to be really important. And I think that's this bottom bullet, reducing and avoiding conflict, can save DOE hundreds of millions of dollars. If you're avoiding lawsuits or avoiding huge public outcry because you're engaging properly, taking public input and putting it to use, then that can ultimately save a lot of costs in the long run. Also, when you kind of think back to the 90s, there was a real concern, I know, in the Tri-Cities and across the country, about what the cleanup and the kind of the shift from weapons programs to cleanup was going to do for the economies at DOE's host communities. And there was a real focus at that time from DOE to support economic development, economic diversification. I know, like, again, I mentioned I born and raised in the Tri-Cities. I had lots of friends move away when we shifted from plutonium production to cleanup. And then when things like the fast flux test facility were shut down, because Hanford was really kind of the game in town. I always talk about this, but my third grade class wrote letters to President Reagan about Hanford at the time, and wanting to ensure that continued federal support came to the Hanford site. Thankfully, there has been a concerted effort for decades now from many across the community to grow and diversify the economy. Our community has probably doubled in size since then. For 320,000 people. So the economic impact of the federal missions are not as significant as they once were, but they still count for about a little less than a quarter of the income into the area, and about 12 to 13% of the jobs. So they're still very significant. And so one of the things we look to do is to identify ways to leverage the capabilities that having a Hanford site brings, whether it's things like cleanup to clean energy, using some of that unneeded, that land that's no longer needed for cleanup for other purposes that can be beneficial to the community. The Tri-Cities, along with other communities across the country, have a very skilled nuclear workforce, have some level of comfort with nuclear technologies, and many of them, including in the Tri-Cities, are really excited about some new opportunities in commercial nuclear, either generation or supply chain or fuels and things like that. And many see that as a logical way to kind of leverage those capabilities and the skilled, knowledgeable workforce that we have. And I won't, in the interest of time, I won't mention any others except for the third one down, commercial reuse of materials formerly deemed waste. We see that there could be some real cool opportunities. For example, the strontium-90 capsules that are stored at the Waste Encapsulation Storage Facility, or WESIF, in the 200 area. There's a company called Zeno Power Systems that would like to use that. They have contracts with the Department of Defense, with the Navy, as well as Space Force, to use that to power deep space probes or undersea vehicles, similar to what they do right now with one of the plutonium isotopes for your probes that get shot out way into deep space, or maybe even for some lunar missions and things like that. And so the opportunity to turn what would otherwise be a liability and a waste product into something that can be beneficially reused for some other purpose. That's a really cool opportunity, and I think there's other examples where we could look to do that across Hanford and the DOE complex in the future as well. And then I'll just very briefly touch on this. This is really not relevant to the Hanford side. This is really driven by an incident that happened at the Mound site in Ohio. It's been fully cleaned up and turned back over to either the Office of Legacy Management within DOE or to the community. But there was an incident where they found, I think, some unexplored ordnance, and they reached out to DOE and said, "Hey, we think this is this came from the Mound site. You guys got to deal with it." And DOE LM said, "No, that's not ours." And it was from World War II. It had a Nazi swastika on it, and how else could it have gotten there had it not been for the DOE mission that was there? And so there was a lot of back and forth, and I think it's still a friction point that they're trying to resolve. We're probably not going to be transferring significant portions of the Hanford site over to LM anytime soon, but it is a priority for ECA overall. And then lastly, like I kind of started off with, we need a long-term solution for used commercial nuclear fuel, defense spent nuclear fuel, as well as the defense high-level waste. And ECA recommends that we reconstitute a dedicated nuclear waste organization within DOE, similar to what used to be called OCROM, or the Office of Civilian Radioactive Waste Management, to be the one and only kind of office that's focused on doing these efforts rather than having it spread out across multiple entities. And I'm 1 minute past time. I think that was my last slide. I see at least one hand up, so happy to answer any questions or that anybody might have.
Thank you, David. So we can take another couple minutes here, but I would, Laura, if you've got a question about small modular nuclear reactors, that's not in our area today. So
don't worry,
Laura,
Jeff. It's about TRIDEC. You're safe.
Okay, please go ahead.
David, it was really good to hear your presentation. I really appreciate it. It was interesting, and it gave me some insight into TRIDEC, an entity that I never quite understood. As a Fukushima activist, I've often wondered about the relationship between TRIDEC and Fukushima Hamadori TRIDEC, and I know you're helping them there normalize the situation and expand economically, even though it's still a very contaminated site. And as you know, they're dumping radioactive wastewater into the Pacific. I work with activists there who are very concerned about the TRIDEC Hamadori, relationship, those that can be out front with it anyway. So I wonder if you can touch on that work.
Yeah, the relationship between, I guess, TRIDEC or the Tri-City community and the folks from the Fukushima Hamadori area really predates my time at TRIDEC, but I think they did see that there are a lot of parallels between the Tri-City area and the Fukushima Hamadori Iwaki City area in Japan, in that there's significant nuclear cleanup effort, and the communities there are looking to try to grow and kind of rebuild their economy. And so we've had a chance to host probably over a dozen visits over the last 10 years plus, from anywhere from universities there to members of the Diet, their cabinet secretary, their equivalent of a cabinet secretary, and even a handful of us, including myself, had a chance to go out there in 2020, right before the pandemic, to kind of share some of the lessons learned that we have from the Hanford site. And there are many differences between how things are done in the United States and in Washington compared to there, but to share some ideas about what might work for them to support their kind of economic development efforts too. And so it's been a really enjoyable opportunity to kind of get to know them better and understand, and try to do what we can to support their efforts.
Well, thank you, David.
Thank you, David.
Appreciate you coming and giving a talk today. It's very educational. We've got to transition now back over to Max in the Oregon Department of Energy with the hope that they will set up a tour for this board to Fukushima at some point in the future.
All right, well, thank you all very much for having me.
Thank you, David. So we got Fukushima. I heard about going to England. France has a spot. So there's might be some international trips. We'll focus on our own backyard, so to speak, first. As I was getting to earlier, and thanks to David for joining us, by the way. I appreciate that, and for coming to speak to us. I had mentioned I'm a little bit under the weather today, so I'm rely upon Matt to help give this presentation here. We're going to focus on the holistic negotiation and what's happened since the fall. And this is to refresh everybody's memory. We talked about it a little bit earlier this morning with DOE, but boy, there's just so much happening at the Hanford site and around the Hanford site. Here we are at 11 o'clock. We really haven't dove into the holistic negotiations, which is one of the biggest aspects of what's happening now at the site. And so we're going to get into some of this follow-up to what has happened since the board and our team put its comment letter out. And if you recall, we had a comment letter that went into DOE at the end of August on the holistic negotiation outcome. That letter was co-signed by both Jeff, representing the board as the chairman, as well as the ODO director, my boss, Janine Benner, putting into the record Oregon's positions on the holistic negotiations, as well as representing and amplifying the voice of Governor Kotek, who submitted comments directly to DOE last summer. And so, in addition to all the other comments that came in from other parties, DOE, Ecology, and EPA put out a response to comments in December. And I'll drop the link in here if people haven't had a chance to look at the response to comments and what that's come in. The tri-parties grouped comments from all comments submitted, grouped them by themes, and then responded accordingly. So there's a lot of content there, but we can piece out what Oregon's specific comments were and sort of where the response is. So we're going to go through some of that right now and kind of just keep everybody up to date on what's happening and what is yet to come. Matt, are you able to? I'm losing my voice. Are you able to kind of take over here?
I can. Can everyone see the first slide of this holistics negotiation update?
Looking good. Yep.
Okay. Well, let's get started. You just heard from Max. Now you get to hear from me about this what has happened. So as many of you know, the holistic negotiations had occurred, and we sent comments in. Jeff Wyatt and the board also submitted a signature on the comments, and it covered a lot of our concerns. Those responses came back. We have reviewed the responses and are going to take a look at what the responses were, in essence, shortly, and what our future input or public comment periods are looking like this year. Stuff that OHCB can keep an eye on coming up. So a brief summary, there was 168 responses from individuals that occurred. 11 of those self-identified as from Oregon. In those numbers, those were people that literally stated they were from Oregon submitting a comment. That does not include, of course, us, the city of Bend, the Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, anyone like that. So just individuals. Of 12 economic groups or environmentally focused groups that submitted comments, 4 of them were from Oregon. So a very strong representation from our state to Hanford on this holistic negotiation comment period, especially from that group. Also, there's comments submitted by the city of Bend, CTUIR, as I spoke of earlier, and ourselves. So what we asked for in brief is we had a few bullet points that we asked for. We want to see environmental impact assessments, preferably environmental impact survey, so an EIS, to meet the NEPA requirements and assist in public engagement. Because as part of NEPA and this environmental assessment process, there are other opportunities for OHCB members and the public to get informed and to make substantial comments that could alter the decisions being made at Hanford. We asked for emergency responder training. should certain routes be picked that are in Oregon so that they could respond to any transportation emergency more effective. We want to definitely solidify the material before it gets shipped. We've spoke a lot about how we don't want to ship liquid. Transparency and public engagement's always been a focus on what we do here. Waste retrieval optimization and technological development, so making sure we get as much waste out of those tanks as possible. And timeline and milestone adjustments for the 200 West decision and TBI date. So that's the decision that's being made in 200 West on what to do with those tanks, what kind of infrastructure to put in to support what's going on out there. So Tom helped fix this slide, but unfortunately I unfixed it somehow. Every time I click it, it seems to do something different. But major comments beyond what we had were, of course, from everyone in the public, not just Oregon, NEPA and SEPA reviews. Definitely a focus on public input. There was a very widespread support and majority thinking that the material should be solidified before leaving Hanford on the grouting issue. Off-site disposal. The majority of people out there really want this material out of the state and put into a licensed facility that has far safer geology underlaying it. Leaking tanks. Many commenters question the tank retrieval sequencing. We have leaks right now in the T farm and U. So a lot of people are questioning why some of the T farms in particular, why those aren't focused first for retrieval. And of course, infrastructure. A lot of agreement that extra tank capacity and activation of the cross-site transfer lines is important, so much so that people wanted to see it a little early. As to the NEPA and SEPA comments, we briefly urge the agency to undertake an EIS of the holistic changes and provide for public review. That would also give us a comment period. The DOE responded that they have initiated 2 supplemental analyses, I suppose is the better term. One for DF high-level waste, so direct feed high-level waste plant, and one for the 200 West tanks. So we should be seeing material on that September of this year. So this is a very important time frame for us as a board and us as Oregon to read the supplemental analyses that come out. They should have at least a 30-day comment period on them both. And then that decision will follow after this comment period in September. Remember that they did not commit to doing a full EIS or even a full supplemental environmental impact analysis, but they did commit to doing a supplemental analysis under their own DOE order. So we will have to read that very carefully and see if it meets what our state believes to be of the same quality as an environmental analysis.
Matt, can I just clarify just on the acronyms here for folks who may not know? SEPA is the State Environmental Policy Act in Washington State. It's a state equivalent of NEPA, the National Environmental Policy Act. And I understand Washington Ecology has to have do their own process or find that the equivalent process has been done to meet their own state regulations under their SEPA law. Oregon doesn't have a state level NEPA, just for way of comparison, but Washington does. So I just wanted to provide that context there on what has to happen.
And some clarity on the supplemental analysis versus supplement to the EIS. Supplemental analysis is an internal look that DOE is going to do to look and determine whether they need to supplement the EIS. And if it would be a supplement to the EIS, then there would be a formal additional public comment period as opposed to sort of the limited public comment period that they've committed to.
Yeah, that would be a much more extensive work that to be looked at by all of us. And Washington Ecology, as Max noted, under SEPA, if they don't think that the quality of the materials they receive from DOE is good enough, they can go for their own SEPA process if they really wanted to. There's also
Matt, I think Esteban's got a question, Matt, if you don't mind. Sorry.
Yes, please go ahead, Esteban.
Yeah, man, I gotta know you old DOE guys. No, just kidding. But just a question: And thanks for that mention, Max, and Matt. So that I think with the incoming administration and everything, I think that's the question on the table, right? When it comes to state authority and laws and legislation, what is it that really? Since I think, like you just mentioned, like Washington, I think has his own. What happens when it comes to like when it comes like, hey, well, this is the NEPA or the SEPA analysis. What is it that? And I think about Matt, you just mentioned, if there's something that pops up, that Oregon wants to challenge or the board, right? I think like what would the powers of that be or that Oregon would put in place, right, when it comes to actual state laws?
It's a big question. So I how do I get to that? First of all, on the SEPA question on the Washington State side, when our friends from ecology come on a little bit later in this meeting, I think we could ask them about their process for a SEPA review just to get more clarity. I admit I'm not an expert. I don't fully understand Washington State SEPA nuances. At the high level, as we mentioned, I believe they have an option to either adopt federal findings under NEPA as equivalent meeting the state's needs, or if it doesn't meet the state's needs, then they have to do additional review. Maybe Ryan or Stephanie could speak to that when ecology comes on later. And to what is Oregon's opportunity? Oregon's opportunity and authority is related to NEPA. I don't think we would have really much to say under the SEPA review. I guess we could, but I think primarily we'll be focused on what the NEPA compliance documentation looks like, both for compliance with process steps as we think they should be, as well as, more importantly, content and information sharing, particularly on offsite disposal of tank waste, transportation, safety, those kind of things. And we will be, reading those documents closely. We'll talk to this board when that information is available, and come up with our plan for comments and what to do after that.
Okay. So another major part of the holistics, and a lot of comments were received on public input and tribal consultations. Many commenters wanted meetings held in large or potentially impacted communities like Spokane, Seattle, Portland, or Bend. We had, requests for Bend. Also, there was the problem that the holistics were secret for a long time. We heard it was coming, but no one knew for many years what was going to be in there. And there was a lack of early engagement in that process because of that secrecy. So what the agencies did do, what was positive, is they did extend that review time. So we had, a third of a year to look over these documents and get our input in. And they did commit to further public engagement when appropriate, in essence. With those supplemental analysis due in 25 or September, excuse me, that's most likely our next comment window is in there. There was a lot of talk about that liquid versus solid or liquid versus grout shipping. General support again was for shipping off-site solid waste forms. There were some comments on the cost comparisons of these things and the necessity of avoiding any stranded wastes. Ecology agreed that alternate sites have better geology under it. That's why they're in favor of getting it off of Hanford. Obviously, the TBI, the Test Bed Initiative, we heard about that this morning. We won't see the information until a little later this year when they ship it. So they also delayed one of the major parts of the holistics, milestone M6264, till the end of this year. So that was a nice thing that the DOE, Ecology, the tri-party agencies did agree to, is delaying that decision until more data is available. It gives us more time for economic and supplemental analysis, route planning, weirs. That way we are better prepared in the future, depending on what decision is made. That flows into the offsite disposal and transportation. A lot of comments were received on this. Again, many people think it's a lot safer to transport that solid material, and that there wasn't enough time for to make an informed decision. DOE did commit to using all applicable regulations when shipping. That's with the DOE would work with DOT and the NRC and any other applicable regulations when they need to finally pack this and ship it. They did move it back, and again, we expect September. You might notice a theme. We're hitting September on a lot of this. Is going to be a big time for OHCB and us. There's something also very interesting that came out of the holistics. There is a new Hanford life cycle scope, schedule, and cost report expected this year. It will include many of the things that were in holistics. And this will be an important document for us to keep to look at. And I would expect that we will inform the board as soon as we have access to that document. So this is just in general for infrastructure. It covers all the tanks, all the cross-site transfer lines, the leakers, what the budget would be. So this was a very large aspect for people to comment on. So it's quite variable what we saw there. Many agreed with the new 1 million gallon capacity in 200 West, although some thought it came too late. Same with the transfer lines and getting those in service sooner rather than later, and making sure that you obtain budget for that. Well, I'm also looking forward this year. They are going to bring in the tank retrieval expert panel. The work plan for that is due at the end of March of this year. And so we will see what that work plan looks like when they plan on meeting. And I'm hoping to be further engaged on that as well. There are other comments in roughly this order about schedules and budgets. There's comments on the direct feed high level waste, why it's becoming direct feed, comments on how secondary waste is going to be treated, supplemental treatment technologies, retrieval technologies. All these had small aspects, but weren't quite a focus in what we in Oregon asked for, or many of the individual comments had asked for. And the high level waste forbearance, obviously, the more of an ecology DOE issue. Nothing has really changed on that front. But that is the brief recap of what happened in holistics, where we're at now, and the upcoming comment periods, which we'll see not only in March for a let's make sure I'm still in the meeting. Not only in March for our take retrieval expert technology panel, but in September when we start seeing these analyses the DOE should be sending us.
Matt, thanks, Matt. I much appreciate that. One thing that's going to come up sooner rather than later is the WIR, the waste incidental to reprocessing, WIR. You have that acronym on your slide. Can you speak to that just a bit so the board understands what that is?
So that's waste incidental to reprocessing. That is what DOE will use to say that this material is not a high level waste. It is waste incidental to those rods being processed. That allows them to use other treatment standards, potentially grouting, and that this material no longer needs a deep geologic repository for final disposal. It gives them operational flexibility on that final waste form. And that's why they're important.
Hey, Max, we have a couple minutes. I was wondering if Jim could give us, as our representative on the Hanford Advisory Board, if he could give us a little overview of what's going on over there.
Jeff, Laura has her hand up. It's probably on that presentation. Do we have a second to take that question before diving into Jim?
Sure.
Thank you. I know that the Trojan site in Rainier is not a federal weapons facility like Hanford is, but is there any idea of when those 36 casks sitting next to the Lower Columbia will be moved? And their waste, it's used fuel, it's high level waste, and I wonder, because people ask about that sometimes if they know about it. Do you have any idea there when they'll be shipped away?
I can speak to that.
Almost certainly unknown, Laura. Oh, sorry, Mark. Okay. You were going to jump in there.
So the High Level Radioactive Waste Committee, which is part of the National Transportation Stakeholders Forum, is addressing sites like Trojan, all the other ones, and the stranded waste. And just like when Dave Replag earlier was talking about the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, until there's a change in the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, there's no place other than Yucca for that spent fuel. So, and that'll be something we can discuss, in the future when we talk about the transportation program. But that's kind of the status on that. Right now, under 180C of the Nuclear Waste Policy Act, it says Yucca. So,
Yeah.
for the stranded
Thanks,
fuel.
Mark. By way of context, both spent nuclear fuel from the commercial reactors as well as the defense waste, like from Hanford, at the high level waste from Hanford site, there's efforts at the federal level, or I think you're aware of, they call it consent-based siting or other sort of broad efforts across the nation to really try a process that might end up with a location for the spent nuclear fuel from commercial as well as defense waste for a permanent location that's not Yucca Mountain. There is a proposal, and this is kind of getting a little bit detailed, but it matters, I think, for both of Oregon, Washington. There's a legal challenge right now to a proposed commercial interim storage facility that was proposed in Texas and licensed by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. It's being sued by the state of Texas, and that lawsuit has gotten all the way up to the Supreme Court as to whether the Nuclear Regulatory Commission had, I don't know if authority is the right word, but they denied the state of Texas to do some standing. And then there was sort of there's been a lot of legal back and forth as to whether that facility could be licensed by the NRC in direct opposition from the state of Texas, which doesn't apparently want that facility to be licensed. So it's getting sort of this legal battle, and this is just an interim facility. That's what they say, interim for spent nuclear waste. Could be indefinite. We have an interim storage facility. That's what Trojan is. Trojan's an interim storage facility. So is Hanford. Until it gets to the Supreme Court, there's some lack of clarity there. Anyway, I know it's a little tangential, but there's a lot of legal review and federal policy work. And where does that lead us? It leads, who knows? It really is a lot of unknown. I wish I had a better answer. I think we're all looking for those answers.
Thanks so much, Max. I appreciate it.
Jim, you're up.
Yeah, hi guys. I appreciate the opportunity to certainly go to the HAB on your guys' behalf, right? I've been taking in all the ESC calls and the committee meetings, and Tom even coerced me into being the vice chair of the cleanup committee. I think it's pretty redundant, or deja vu all over again. But a couple notes I put down, that you probably heard today, but I need to hear them 9 times as well, is cross-site transfer lines, the tank leak response, the DF law hot commissioning, TBI, which we just went over, WARM, or the West Area Risk Management, and the TSCR tank size cesium removal. I think these things are front and center. Certainly the test bed in October, they pulled, the samples and, over 9 days and sent them off for 120 days. We should get the results back in February. And depending on the results, the totes will be ready for ship, but the shipments will be weather dependent, and half of the liquid will go to Texas and the other half to Utah. On the Rev 9, certainly the public should receive an advanced 60-day notice for the comment period. Ecology is, of course, still closing out the unit groups, and expect the comment period to still open sometime in 2025, the 324 building. And the proposed plan period is a comment period is expected in the fall of 2025. The waste incidental to reprocessing evaluation of the 200 West tanks will have a 90-day comment period tentatively scheduled for February 12th through May 13th. And the NEPA, which we just went over, and certainly the record of decision in the 100 and 100K is going to have a comment period coming up. These are things that we can continue to hear and see. I think it's important, you guys, as I go there, I'm pushing on things that I know, right? Trying to get Maddie recognized as my alternate. I'm under no illusion that I know more than any of you. In fact, I'm probably the least versed in what I'm taking forward up there. But I don't just want to be, your eyes and ears. I've got to be able to carry a message, right? I keep talking to them about shipping liquid waste and when we're going to have a decision there or a discussion about these things. The HAB put together workshops last week, and we put together a bunch of recommendations to DOE. I won't read them to you. I'll certainly make sure we get them out. But I want to have you guys reach out to me, and I think our next meeting is February 12th and 13th, and tell me what I need to carry, right? I'm happy to do these things while I, continue to dive in. And Esteban, I see you got your hand up, and Matt and Tom certainly on my team, and they said if you have any questions, they're happy to answer them.
No, the only thing I want to say is thanks, Jim, for doing that. And the big thing is that, right? Because I know the big thing I always like talk to folks about joining like the HAB or other boards is that they feel intimidated, that they don't know much. So to me, I think thank you. And to me, that's a big thing that I think, especially, I think folks I know like in Eastern Oregon sometimes or the thing, but yeah, or what's the feel that people when you talk to them about Hanford and, they're in your area.
Yeah, certainly. And here it's a big concern, right there on the Columbia River. And I'm surprised how many folks across the state aren't up to speed on like the 324 building, but it's getting a lot more traction around here. As it kind of bubbles to the surface. And my son's a fishing guide and spends a lot of time in the Hanford Reach. And he said the discussion is reaching those individuals. So, it's still out there, and we still need to, keep addressing it.
Okay, thanks for the update, Jim. And I think Mark and Max, when we put together future agendas for the board, we need to build in a 10 or 15-minute kind of HAB update from Jim, Maddie, Mia, and Tom, and you all.
Very good idea.
So. Okay, we're moving into the next item on the agenda, which is board business. So the first item on my list is the bylaws. So I would turn that over to Stephen.